ABC 7 Chicago presents Do You Hear Me? A discussion about race in America and Chicago. For 66 years, I have been an American citizen by birth. I grew up in Rhode Island, and as a teenager watched as people who looked like me fought for my right for equality in the South while being beaten up, hosed by firemen under the direction of Bull Connor, gassed and bloodied on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and many other acts of violence against them simply to ask for America to live up to its credo and justice for all. In those 50 years, I have seen countless African-American men murdered at the hands of those who take an oath to serve and to protect. 10 days ago, George Floyd was murdered by Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis, a policeman who, with 3 of his fellow officers, snuffed out this man's life while he pled for humanity. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. That murder, like so many of the thousands of other killings of people who look like me over the past 300 years, broke my heart. I too, like my father and grandfathers, have been affected by racism during my lifetime, so I asked our general manager for this town hall, and he granted that request immediately. Welcome again to ABC 7 Presents Do You Hear Me? A discussion about race. Joining me now for this much-needed discussion is our lead news anchor, Cheryl Burton, a daughter of Chicago and a woman who has endured unwanted and unfair share of racism and discrimination. Good afternoon, Cheryl.
Good afternoon, JR, and good afternoon to all of our panel. And let me just share a little bit of myself. As JR said, I'm a Chicago native, a Chicago daughter, born and raised on the south side of Chicago. I am the daughter of 2 parents who were born in the Depression and raised in the Civil Rights Movement in Birmingham, Alabama. My father went to college at Morehouse College with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He is also a fraternity brother of Alpha Phi Alpha of Dr. King. And my mom was raised and educated in a little red schoolhouse in Birmingham, Alabama. So I have a rich history and a foundation of justice and equality and fighting for justice and equality. Now, I have to share a little bit about my heart was broken after seeing the protests and the riots this weekend and the looting. But I refer to a famous speech that I recited and won an award for on the south side of Chicago at Neal School. My first writing award was given to me because I wrote it about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And one of the excerpts from the speech that I did say was, Dr. King said that the riot is the language of the unheard. What has America failed to hear? So I say that to you because I want to ask our panelists, after I introduce our panelists, were the protests, were the demonstrations, did they have value? Do they have value? And did they have purpose? So joining us this afternoon on Thursday here at ABC 7 is Aislinn Pulley. She is the co-executive director of Chicago Torture Justice Center, founded out of the historic 2015 reparations ordinance for Chicago survivors of the Chicago police torture. Ms. Pulley is also the co-founder of Black Lives Matter. Also joining us this afternoon is Jamal Cole, the champion of social justice. His mission to be more interconnected to Chicago on the pillars of service and education. He is also the founder and CEO of the fastest growing social impact organization, My Block, My Hood, My City. He is also the creator of an exposed-based educational program for teenagers. Thank you for joining us. Also, Keena Collins, nationally recognized as a gun violence prevention and healthcare advocate. She is a native of the West Side, the Austin community. She has helped organize protests after the videotape was released of an ex-Chicago police officer shooting Laquan McDonald 16 times. She also is a recent candidate for the House of Representatives in the 7th District. And also joining us is Mr. William Callaway. He was recently an aldermanic candidate as well in the 5th Ward. He is a community activist, on his quest for social justice, sharing his extraordinary experience and bringing high level of awareness across the country about racial inequality and social injustice. He is on the ground. He has grassroots efforts, and he is an expert providing intriguing analysis on the current state of the movement for social equality and how imbalanced the justice system can lead to violence. So welcome to our panel, our esteemed panel on this afternoon. So first, I ask you, and I will ask Mr. Callaway, what do you think the value of the protests and the demonstrations do have moving forward?
Well, first off, thank you for having me, and thank you for having us, and hello to the other panel guests. Well, first of all, I think that throughout the years I've seen in the city, I've seen firsthand on what protests can do. We've seen the level of awareness that it can bring, the conscious level throughout the city to be heightened. Even when we fought for the release of the Laquan McDonald video, right? That was a level of us protesting the government to say, hey, we demand transparency. We demand accountability on our government. So we just want people to know that protest isn't just us hitting the streets, but it's also hitting the courtroom. As Keena also will probably speak on this, is also us hitting policy, making sure there's policy that reflects things that we need on the ground as well. So we have seen throughout the years the effects and the impact that protests can have. And I think moving forward, I hope that to see more protests in the days and weeks to come, but hopefully we as a community and community organizers and activists can hash out some clear, concise demands and actionable items that we can go and protest for. So I definitely think it's effective.
Keena?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Will had to say. Here's what I would say. The real question that we need to ask America right now is, why does it take a viral consumption of Black suffering in order to get any action in our criminal justice system? And what we know about the American criminal justice system is that it is not broke. It is working exactly how it was implemented. And that is why we see young people taking to the streets and folks from all different backgrounds taking to the streets because they're enraged that this is happening. And what the system has proven is that the criminal justice system has proven is that it cannot be rehabilitated and reformed. And so we have to collectively come together and scream this to the rooftop and let folks know that Black America right now is in a state of emergency. And so that is why we're seeing the urgency from the community. But the only time that we have seen action and why we have to do these protests in America is because the only time anything gets done is when Black America shames the system into doing what is right. And so for me, I'm very proud. I attended some of the protests downtown, and it was full of young people. These are young people who were 5 years old when Occupy Wall Street was happening. These are young people who grew up in Black Lives Matter, Women's March, March for Our Lives, the climate strike. They are inundated and clamoring for a political revolution and just for people to hear them out. And so I think that it is valuable, and the history of America has proven that in those protests is how we see active change.
So Ms. Pulley and Jamal, I'd like you also to chime in on that, but also I just thought about something. The difference between what happened during the protests at Wall Street and then go back to the protests of the 60s and right now, it seems like the movements, and I'll say movements because back then it was just one movement and now it's 2 or 3 different movements who have come together to take it 3 or 4 steps level to make people aware of this problem that has been existing for 400 years. What's the difference between that Wall Street type of protest, which only happened 15, 20 years ago, and right now, where the whole world is really, I saw protests in London, Paris, Africa, all over the place, India, Mumbai. What's the difference in the time periods?
Well, I think that there are a few differences. There are also a few similarities. I think with the Occupy movement, we saw movements happening internationally as well. There was Arab Spring. There were general strikes occurring across Europe. Africa was rising up. There were protests in Nigeria, in Ghana, and South Africa. So there was also a global response to the global economic crisis that was happening, and that influenced greatly Occupy Wall Street. The Occupy movement was directly inspired by those protests. I think what we're seeing now is almost a kind of reversal of that, where the protests that are happening here in the United States are spurring solidarity protests across the world. We're seeing protests again in Nigeria, in South Africa, in France, in Britain, in Belgium, in Ireland, Iran. So we're now kind of seeing that a similar happening, but kind of opposite reversal of how that is happening. I think the lead up to this is the fact that we've had Oscar Grant murdered on camera. We've had Mike Brown murdered. We've had in Chicago not only the torture that John Burge did, but the torture that was done by officers Boudreaux, Halloran, O'Brien, who have never been brought to justice. We've seen Gerald Reed, who was granted a new trial, who then Judge Hennelly did an illegal move reversing that new trial and sending him back to prison. We've seen in Chicago not only the murder of Laquan McDonald, but also the murder of Ronald Johnson, the murder of Dakota Bright, the murder of Deshaun Pittman, the murder of so many other people, Pierre Laurie. And there has been no changes. We have the consent decree right now. It's been a year in place. Black Lives Matter Chicago won enforcement rights for the first time in the history of this country. Community organizations won enforcement rights in a federal consent decree. And we see that nothing has changed. At first, 5 years ago, they were saying body cameras were the answer. Now we see body cameras don't produce any changes. So the demands on the ground are that that not only are young people, but old people, all generations are tired of this system. The system will not change. The system cannot reform itself. And what we're asking for is defunding of policing. Right now, Chicago has the most police per 100,000 people in the country. 40% of our operating budget goes toward policing. 5% of all arrests, only 5% are violent. So the arguments that are used to justify policing are actually not statistically found. And so we have budget deficits where we've lost our public mental health care clinics. We have the largest public school closing in the history of the country in Chicago. What we need actual services that serve our people, that benefit our people and benefit our community. What we absolutely cannot stand anymore is policing, and policing that terrorizes our people, that throws them in jail, and that murders our people. We cannot stand for it any longer, and we will not accept these piecemeal reforms that do nothing but actually expand policing. Lori Lightfoot said she has a 90-day plan and she wants more training. Police do not need to be trained. Do not need to be trained to not shoot and torture people. What they need is to be defunded. We need actual experts who know how to deal with crises. We need psychologists. We need street medics. Those are the people that we need to be empowering. In this moment of a pandemic, we need to arm ourselves with public health officials. That's what we need.
And excellent points there. And so some people put their lives on the line because we are in a COVID-19 pandemic. Some people in the faith community will call it the COVID-16-19 pandemic. If you go back to 1619. But Mr. Cole, let's talk about how you feel about this. Are we an economy or are we a society? Because after the looting and the riots and the demonstrations and the protests, people said it looked different because the protests and the demonstrations took place in different parts of the state. What's your thought on that, Mr. Cole?
You know what? Again, thank you for having me. Hello to the other guests on the show. Look, I think that, having a police badge, it gives you a platform that can amplify, your true character. If you're a good person, having that badge gives you a platform to do good. If you're a bad person, having that badge can amplify your wickedness. And as a person that has, I was in the, I tore my MCL in a rally downtown the other day. I made it through 4 years of basketball and never got hurt, but one rally on my home turf, and I knocked out the season. But you know what? I say that to say I've never the police officers did show some restraint, but when you show up downtown in riot gear and you have the old billy clubs with etchings on them like you hit someone with it before, and you have the helmets on, it looks like, what is this? Call of Duty. It's
Mhm.
really confrontational to youth there, and so and I saw a lot of evil in some of their eyes. I saw it with my own eyes, and I
Mhm.
saw and I saw more tattoos than I ever saw. I mean, police officers with sleeve tattoos. I never seen this in my life, and it was very confrontational. So even people that were downtown peacefully protesting, it turned it felt very confrontational. So I think that the deal is simple. Obviously, you stop killing us, and we'll stop protesting just the oppression of Black people in this country. I mean, that I don't know how much more clear we can get, but that's our stance on it.
People forget how this country was formed. And it was formed in a harbor in Boston, the Boston Tea Party, when
Yeah.
some Americans protested the fact that they had to pay taxes on goods and they had no representation at all. Now, were they called terrorists or were they called revolutionaries? And that's the real question of America. I mean, we've got to answer this question. And in particular, I think white America has to answer this question of trust. We have never been able to trust the system, trust the facts, trust the programs, trust the aspect of, okay, we're going to do this for you. And then the next year or so or two, it doesn't happen. And the same thing continues to happen over and over again, just like the murders of all these African American men, from Trayvon Martin, I'll go all the way back to Fred Hampton. You can go even further back to that, to
Yep.
the lynchings that happened in America, where they had the word. I don't even know if a lot of people understand what the word picnic means. Okay,
Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
not a picnic. It's supposed to be a barbecue, but they were going to an
Lynch.
event where they watched people hang Black men and then laid out their checkerboard cloth and their fine linen and everything, and enjoyed a lunch or whatever, while a man lost his life for nothing, for little or nothing. So it comes down to trust. It's a trust factor. And not only from that standpoint, politically, but institutionally with business. American business has never been able to be trusted to treat people fairly. I'll tell you a real quick story, and we'll get back to some other subjects. But my mother-in-law, okay, who worked at the old Illinois Bell that became Ameritech, that became AT&T. Every year she would get a review, and on the review it would be very favorable. So she'd be moving up from position to position to position, all while going to college to get her associate's degree and then her bachelor's degree in finance. And then after about the sixth or seventh time, the person that was her boss, who was a white man, who was giving her all these favorable reviews, they took him out of the system, sent him to Springfield, and put this white woman in command. So she called my mother-in-law up, Carolyn McClinton, for her next review, and she says, I don't understand all of these unfavorable reviews you've been getting. And Carolyn looked at her and said, what do you mean unfavorable? I've been getting favorable reviews. She says, not according to this. And the good thing, she saved every copy of every one of those reviews. The lady left the room, came back, and said, okay, you've been promoted, da-da-da-da-da. She continued to work her way through the system, quit her job, took her pension, and went on and formed her own successful financial business. So that's just one aspect of how this institutionalized racism happens covertly. A lot of it happens overtly.
Well, sometimes a dream can be born out of hardship. And that is an example of her never giving up and believing in herself.
Mhm.
And, we would be remiss if we didn't mention the fact that as we speak to you right now, they are celebrating the life and legacy of George Floyd in
Mhm.
Minneapolis. And I want to talk about his daughter yesterday, his 6-year-old daughter. He has other children, but his 6-year-old daughter told the story of when she was asked the question, what about your dad? What do you remember? She said, my dad changed the world. Now, out of the mouths of babes, that is a 6-year-old, because if you go around the world, people are memorializing his life. But the question that we need to ask is, this cannot just be a moment. It has to be a movement. And how can this movement translate into policies so that this doesn't happen again? So that is the question we need to round robin and talk about. And Ms. Collins, what are your thoughts, seeing as though you did run, for political office?
Yeah, absolutely. On the federal level, it is, first of all, a lot of these laws need to be uniformed nationally. And that's why, and so let me give you an example. When Eric Gardner was murdered in New York, the chokehold is outlawed through the NYPD. It's supposed to be, but they used it. He ended up dying, and that was a huge conversation surrounding his death. In the case of Mr. Floyd, and what we found out in Minnesota is that there's not any law about outlawing chokeholds. And so what we do need our congressional leaders to do is to go back to the drawing board. And I know that the Democrats right now are drafting a piece of legislation which is being charged by the Congressional Black Caucus to put forth a criminal justice reform bill, but it goes beyond that. We need to look at the military budget. And some people may say, why? Well, the National Defense Authorization Act, it allows for police officers and police departments and cities to purchase military equipment for the police departments. It absolutely makes no sense. So when Aislinn, and this will make me the last point that I make, when Aislinn says we need to defund the police, let's break that down. What we know right now is that the Chicago police budget has swelled to $1.7 billion for 2020. For the last 8 consecutive years, we have seen an increase in the police budget and a decrease in funding for schools, funding for programs in the community. We have slashed mental health facilities. So when we talk about the system and institutionalized systems, we have to strike at the core. And the core is give people quality housing, quality access to healthcare, and give them the ability to have a livable wage. And so when we say defund the police, is not just to people just saying that. There's an actual numbers and budgets behind it.
Yeah, in 1967, of course, you guys know, after the riots, then our governor, Otto Kerner, the Kerner Commission was created under the auspices of President Johnson after the riots to talk about how do we change this. So, Ms. Pulley, do we need to have another commission?
Oh, we've had commissions, we've had so many forms of studies. Obama did a whole task force. It's been done. It's been regurgitated over and over again. Lori Lightfoot was a part of a police task force report after the video came out about Laquan. And then the DOJ report came out, which kind of echoed a lot of stuff that was in that task force report. We have the evidence. The evidence is not hidden. It's public. What we need right now in this moment is the political will to enact change. We know what to do. We know what the problem is. What we don't have is political will. The people on the ground are saying enough. We will not tolerate the status quo as is. We are literally dying. An important thing to bring up at this point is also the fact that we're in a pandemic. And part of the reason why the United States is leading the world in deaths is because we have such a fractured healthcare system. So instead of implementing and prioritizing healthcare for our people during a time when the whole world is dealing with this pandemic, what we see instead is an extreme militarization of our police forces and a rapid increase in the prison industrial complex. That's where the money that should have been dedicated to healthcare and education and housing and other services has gone. We don't have a universal healthcare system because we have the largest police force in the world and the largest military in the world. We don't have universal college education for similar reasons. So it's a question of political will at this point. We know the data. The data has been out there. It's been done numerous times by a number of colleges, universities, think tanks, etc. What we need is implementation now.
You know, the city of Los Angeles just announced that they're taking $250 million away from the police budget, and they're going to invest it in the Black community, in schools, in housing, in food, And so maybe Chicago can learn a lesson from that. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer that you absolutely positively have to do this. But this comes from legislation. We have got to go to the ballot box. We've got to go and vote. It cannot happen like it happened, for instance, in Michigan in 2016, where 70,000 African American voters stayed away from the polls in Detroit, Flint, and Grand Rapids.
And, you know, you guys talk about how we have to make changes in policy and legislation, but I want to talk to Mr. Cole about this. I saw a cartoon in the paper the other day, and it was of a police officer sitting at a lunch counter with a little boy. And the police officer asked the little boy, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And the caption he responded was, "Alive." That's very powerful. And what was also powerful was the testimony that you gave a couple of days ago about the mother with 4 children. And then you challenged this country, this world, with 15 words. Speak on that, Mr. Cole.
Yeah, you know, I definitely think we need to change policies, and I think that we also need to change some personalities. You know, parents teach you that growing up, treat people the way you want to be treated. As far as the lady, you know, it's a single mom, you know, on 83rd, you know, she got 4 kids, a 15-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and 3-month-old, and she had a full-time job at the coffee shop down the street, and they let her bring her 3-month-old to work because you know, she couldn't afford daycare, and you know, she get paid $500 every 2 weeks because that's what that's what the coffee shop said was in the budget. But her rent was $800 a month. Her light bill is $40 a month. Her gas bill is $100 a month. Her water bill in the house is $100 a month. Her phone bill, I mean, that's $1,140. You know, and she only make $1,000 a month. And now she don't have a job because you know, some of the reckless looting. Look, I agree with riots. I agree with protesting. I am not, and I don't want to even be. I don't even like talking to the youth and saying, "Hey, I understand you, but don't do this," or "I understand you, but," I don't want to devalue how they feel at all. I just want to say, I understand you, and I think there's a way that we could resist constructively as well, because downtown's going to get rebuilt. I'm not so confident that Chatham is going to be rebuilt. A lot of the lots on Madison and Pulaski on the west side haven't even been rebuilt since 1968. You know what I mean? There's still vacant lots over there. So we need to think of that. As far as I was just trying to educate youth on as best as I could, the difference between force and violence. Like, you know, force and violence are 2 different things. Like, violence is always violence, but force can be powerful. Like, a protest can be forceful without becoming violent. But again, I think it wasn't only the youth that were being violent either, or it wasn't only the youth that were looting either. And it was people of all different colors looting. But if you want to make a difference in your community, I don't want to listen, if you want to make a difference, ask yourself 15 words. Like, if you want to be a politician, I'm telling you, if you understand these 15 words, you'll be a politician in a few months from now, man. I always tell kids, you want to be a leader in your community, ask yourself these 15 words. Those 15 words are, what's something simple that I can do that'll have a positive impact on my block? What's something simple that I can do that'll have a positive impact on my block? Can you grab a broom and a dustpan and go sweep up a storefront? Can you make a well-being call to a senior? What's something simple you can do? And if you start with the small things, you can develop the muscle it takes to take on bigger challenges. And just because it's simple don't mean it's easy, but this stuff really can be easy. Like, I'm almost feeling like I want to make a decision tree for people right now that say, "Oh, how can I get involved?" Well, listen, man, if you have over $5,000 of disposable income a month, then maybe you're a giver. Maybe you should look up organizations that you can give to. You know, if you are making $2,500 and less, well, maybe you might be can give something, but maybe you can make some calls to officials. If you don't have 500 savings and lower, maybe you're a doer. Maybe you're on the front lines. Maybe you're volunteering. Like, we all should be given something, and we all should be reading. We should definitely be reading like the new Jim Crow and reading social justice magazines right now. But I feel like there's a decision tree needs to be made for people to get involved. But it starts with asking yourself, what can I do to make a difference? You can really start with yourself.
Also, and I'll use my background in the world of sports, over the decades, there have been a few professional athletes who have contributed their time, their voice to trying to civilly make this world better for us. People like Muhammad Ali, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Jim Brown at the time in the 60s. And then recently, LeBron James and Dwayne Wade and Chris Paul and guys like that. But there are times, and especially Colin Kaepernick, who really started this whole thing about kneeling. And I got a question, because I put out the word on social media that, hey, I'd like to get some questions from some people regarding this whole situation. And this question from a man named Al Penn said, recently, New Orleans Saints quarterback Drew Brees said, I will never agree with anybody disrespecting the flag of the United States of America or our country. Is it possible to explain why kneeling is not disrespecting the flag and why there is so much misunderstanding about kneeling and the second verse of the national anthem? And so my response to that is this. First and foremost, most people have got the wrong idea about why Colin Kaepernick started this whole thing with kneeling that cost him his job. He got this information from a Green Beret friend of his who told him that one of the best ways to show your displeasure with this is to take a knee. And what has happened? When he did that, police organizations all across the country vilified him for that. And now what did we see after George Floyd's death? We see policemen kneeling with demonstrators and protesters who are only asking for their civil rights. And as far as the Drew Brees thing is concerned, he had made a statement today saying he was totally wrong and all of that. The problem with folks like that who are well-meaning is that they're tone deaf because they don't understand what we have gone through. And look what Colin Kaepernick gave up, okay, just to prove a point and to get people to understand that this police brutality has got to stop.
And JR, the police chief in Minneapolis greeted the body of George Floyd today, and he knelt down on the ground out of respect. And when you talked about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Muhammad Ali from that photo in 1967, when Muhammad Ali was protesting the Vietnam War, recently Kareem did an op-ed in the LA Times, and I'll quote a little bit about what he said. He said, being black is living in a burning building, choking on the smoke of the burning flames of racism in America. It is like dust in the air. We have to stay vigilant, still in the air, because it's stealing our breath. So, Mr. Callaway, I want you to speak to that. And Mayor Lightfoot, is part of her 90-day reform, she feels like citizens should be part of the training process at the police academy. So please address both of those, if you will.
Yeah, without a doubt. I kind of agree with Aislinn about police training. I think we've done enough to outline what's wrong with the Chicago Police Department when it comes to reform. But listen, the true problem with Chicago Police Department is one of the problems is the Fraternal Order of Police contract. When we talk about policy and we talk about legislation, we have to get to the nucleus of it all. There's provisions in the Fraternal Order of Police Law 7 contract that allows them to move and behave in the way that they do. If the Chicago Police Department a sworn officer is involved in an officer-involved shooting, legally, by contractual agreement with the city of Chicago, that officer has 72 hours before he or she has to give a statement about what happened with that shooting. As we can see with the case of Jason Van Dyke and with the 4 other officers, that gives them and allows them time to corroborate evidence, corroborate their stories, to falsify testimony and police reports. So if we really want to change something, and not just training, we really need to change the Fraternal Order Police contract. And we need, if Mayor Lightfoot, which I'm sure she's committed to really reforming the Chicago Police Department, she would sit with community organizers, community activists like us, and hear our thoughts on what needs to change when it comes to the Fraternal Order of Police contract. Now, even on a federal,
go ahead. I'm sorry. No, keep going. I'm sorry.
Yeah, even on a federal level, as Keena was saying, when I first saw the tape, I thought about a couple things when I saw Mr. Floyd being murdered that day in Minneapolis. One of the things that I did think about was not only, of course, that it was a lynching and it was a murder, but was the fact that it was five to 7 people on the curb watching him die, right? And how some of them people might wanted to intervene, but because the way the law is set up, they didn't want to be subjected to possible prosecution. If I'm walking down the street and I see a Chicago police officer with their knee in Jamal Cole's neck, I'm not just gonna sit there and watch and videotape. I'm gonna want to intervene, especially if he's begging for his life. So as on a policy side, I said that to say on a policy side, I would believe it should be some type of legislation to say, you know what, as a private citizen, we should have some type of amnesty from prosecution. If we see if a police officer is making an unduly arrest, and we deem as we the people think he's making an unduly arrest, I should have the right to intervene and possibly save that person's life, right, without being subjected to any type of prosecution. Because we've seen it with Eric Garner, we've seen it with George Floyd. I don't want to see it again. And a lot of people will probably move different, including officers, if they know that the public will intervene on unduly arrest, sort of like that. So the Fraternal Order of Police contract and amnesty from any type of prosecution if we see a police unlawfully using use of force. And I think those two things right there would be game changers, not only in the city of Chicago, but all across the country.
JR, you were going to say something?
What is really sad, and I'm gonna talk about something that's sad and then something that's good. What is really sad is in all of these incidences, especially when you go from Trayvon Martin to Michael Brown to Freddie Gray to Eric Garner to Laquan McDonald and on to George Floyd. All of this stuff was being videotaped. And they knew they were being videotaped. They knew it. And then, especially in the Laquan McDonald situation, they tried to erase the videotape. What that answers to is an arrogance that has gone through this whole blue line for the last 300 years. That they would never be held to any type of prosecution whatsoever. So in my world, when you give somebody the power of life and death, if they take that life without the reasons that are stated for it, that their life is in danger or whatever, they should suffer 3 times the crime. Just like an antitrust lawsuit, okay? The good part of this is the authorities up in Minnesota immediately arrested the perpetrator, Chauvin. It took them a while to arrest the other 3 officers, which in a lot of other cases didn't happen for weeks, months, or even years later. And they finally are going to put these people on trial to a jury of their peers. And if they are convicted, they're going to do at least 40 years, or at least Chauvin's going to do at least 40 years. And that needs to be emphasized to everybody who carries a badge. You are here to serve and protect, not take a life.
Well, this is just the first step. Go ahead, Ms. Collins.
Yeah, if I could add, I know that we've been in this conversation a little bit over 30 or 40 minutes. I just want to hold space and say we cannot forget about Black women in this movement when we talk about the Black Lives Matter movement. Say Her Name was created because of the erasure of Black women. When we talk about Laquan McDonald, you don't get a Laquan McDonald without the movement for Rekia Boyd, Ayanna Stanley Jones, Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland. Oftentimes when we think of violence being inflicted in police state sanctioned violence, we do see it as young Black men against white officers. But violence looks a number of ways, right? And it's very gender specific for Black women in particular. We know that Black women are 10 times more likely to be sexually assaulted or molested or raped by police officers. Officer Daniel Holtzclaw in Oklahoma is sitting in a life sentence because he was strategically targeting low-income African-American women and raping them. This is why this is important in the Black Lives Matter movement and why we must continue to inject this for Black trans women, for Black trans people, period, in this movement, is because oftentimes they are abused in places that people cannot easily galvanize around them. For me, the point that Jim Rose just made, yes, we always feel this enragement when police officers do this, but I'm more invested in how do we invest in community restorative justice practices. Throwing these police officers in jail, okay, but the system in itself is broken. So how are we striking at the root? I want to see an investment in organizations like the Violence Interrupters, who come in and third party community intervention, de-escalate situations and create safety for the community. So for me, we also have to shift our mindset around restorative justice. And it
Mm-hmm.
can't just be punitive. We've tried that. And when that occurs, it hasn't helped. And so how are we striking and plucking at the root, and also keeping at the forefront that violence looks a number of ways? And
Mm-hmm.
let's continue to uplift the voices of the Black trans community and Black women.
And one of the reasons why I mentioned that is because sometimes, because of the way these police have been taught over the centuries,
Yeah.
okay, one of the things they do understand is punitive justice. And perhaps if the punitive justice is enough to deter them from kneeling down on George Floyd's neck, something may happen that is good. I also have a question for Jamal, and forgive me for jumping back into my sports world for just a second, but Jamal, and maybe William, if you could also answer this, what do you guys think is the role of the people who play our professional sports in trying to help stop this and trying to help make sure that we've turned the corner and start going down the hill towards justice?
Great question, man. I think that just becoming politically mature enough to speak publicly first, I think that would be helpful. You know, we all know what's right and wrong, and you know what's in your heart to do. So doing something would be helpful. I think I enjoy seeing the one-offs and the NBA players that are showing up in the communities and helping out. It would be great to see them organized together. Maybe, you know, you might be able to support somebody with a $50K donation, but if you can organize maybe 50 players in a league and you guys can come together and support on a larger scale, I think that'd be maybe just showing like someone needs to step in there and show some leadership so they can put players together so they can focus on national issues. I would love to see that happen. A lot of times the Chicago Bears have been supportive of My Block, My Hood, My City, and you know, they've given us support. But I would like to see it more. You know, sometimes you want to come out and donate food, and you know, or you want to do something like you know, cut some grass or something like that. But I would like to see support with making systemic changes rather than you know, you give a man food for, you know, you give a man a fish, you give him food for a day, but if you teach him how to fish, you give him food for a lifetime. So you can give us support for one day, but how are you empowering us to take care of communities for the long run? So I would like to see some organizing in that in these professional sports.
And I'll tell you this too, in my experience, in my almost 50 years of experience of covering sports, from time to time, I would bring that issue up to various athletes. Some were receptive, others were wholly not receptive and worried about their brand or staying with the team or keeping their position and things like that. And so we also have to break this cycle, this psychological cycle of the chains that are on somebody. For instance, if you made $10,000 a year or $100 million a year, but you were still in handcuffs and chains, you're still a slave. And to get that message across to some of these guys, some are receptive and some aren't. Like Akeem Hicks yesterday came out and said, you know, we had this team meeting virtually and it was going to be about what's happening and everything. And he said, you know, I really didn't want to go because I knew it was going to be the same old stuff, the same old superfluous pep. But what he got out of it was some of his teammates who he thought were not on the side of right finally stepped up and said, you know what, this issue is more important than me getting an NFL paycheck. So I've got to say something. And that's why the Colin Kaepernick situation is so important. People talk all the time about these things. For instance, the other day, the coach of the Seattle Seahawks talked about how he supported Kaepernick and how Kaepernick was great and doing what he did. Well, why didn't you bring him on your team when you had a chance? That's my message to all these NFL teams, NBA teams, NHL teams, Major League Baseball. That's what they've got to do.
Mr. Callaway, I see you on a there. I see a lot of reaction coming out of that car there.
No, I think he raises valid points. I think for people like my community in South Shore, we just had a gathering on 71st Street on Monday, and I mean, monetary support is cool, like Jamal said. Like, if you want to make a monetary donation, because freedom is not free. Yes, we need funds to fund the movement, but it means a lot to be on ground with us. Like Matt Forte popped out. He came on 71st and Chappelle. And if you're familiar with 71st and Chappelle, you know that 2 years ago, Harith Snoop Augustus, a barber from our neighborhood, was shot and killed in front of one of our stores by Chicago Police Department, right? And that our neighborhood went into an uproar after that, and it made national news. But it meant a lot for people like Matt Forte to bring his platform, bring his influence on the ground with us, where we can touch him, where he don't feel like he's too good to talk about a certain controversial issue. But I think that's the issue with a lot of these athletes and entertainers. I think Jalen, he laid it out perfectly. It don't matter if you're making $10-15 million if you still in chains. And I think they're fearful too because of their brand, because of their endorsement deals going down the drain, of maintaining their position on the franchise or with the company or team that they represent. Because I think that what the NFL has did about ostracizing and blackballing Colin Kaepernick has probably instilled fear in of a lot of Black athletes. But we need athletes, white or Black, to stand up. And I'm kind of disappointed. I'm disappointed in Drew Brees' comment, because all that does is reflect his whiteness and his privilege, right? He can't relate to what we're really going through. We could probably be at a Black Lives Matter protest. He'd be the one to scream out all lives matter, right? He's just tone deaf, right? So I definitely think that athletes should use their platforms way more, come out, be present, be visible, and talk on these issues.
And I think, you guys, we are coming to the end of this discussion, which is remarkable because we have learned so much. It's been incredible. And we do have to talk about, I go to the South Side all the time because my family home is still there. I have siblings who still live there. And I talk to the young people, and a lot of them say they need sustainable jobs with healthcare benefits. We haven't talked about that much in this hour, but that, of course, came out of the 1967 riots in that the Kerner Commission. All of the young people, they want jobs that are sustainable, incomes where they can take care of their family, take care of their children. Some college graduates can barely find jobs these days. Today, 40 million people are unemployed after this COVID pandemic. So we really have a lot of work to do, but at least we are dialoguing and we are having conversation. And, I'd like to quote the words of the song, More Than I Can Bear. It's the song that they brought George Floyd's body into the auditorium today. It says, I've been through the fire. I've been through the floods. I'm broken in pieces, but God still cares. He won't put more on me than I can bear. So as we close out this hour of discussion and candid conversation on race, I'd like to go round robin for each one of you. Your final thoughts, what you want to be heard, because you cannot heal a nation unless you are heard. Let's get right to it, Mr. Cole.
Again, I'm just so inspired by everybody on this call. Man, I look forward to learning so much from y'all and working with y'all. You do what you love and you organically build relationships with people that help you. And I'm looking forward to working with y'all. To the viewers, I would just ask yourself, again, 15 words. What's something simple I can do that'll have a positive impact on my block? And I'm telling you, if you start right there with those little ripples, we can create a wave of change, not only in Chicago, but throughout the country.
Ms. Pulley.
I want to thank you all for having me be a part of this great conversation. I think right now we are at an important moment in the history of our people and in the history of this country. And we can enact radical change. We are at a point where we need to have the political will to continue fighting, to refuse reforms that actually don't advance us. And to dig deep. We need a radical reorganization of society. The 40 million people who are now unemployed means that we are nearly at the same rate as the height of the Great Depression. So we have a ton of crises that have been created by policy. And what that means is that they can be changed by us. And the thousands, the hundreds of thousands who are marching in the streets, we are demanding change. We need a massive defunding of policing. We need that funding to be reorganized into our schools, into our healthcare system, into affordable housing. We need a massive jobs program created. We have neighborhoods in this city where unemployment is as high as 50%, and that was pre-pandemic. So we have been in this crisis. It's time for change, and we will not accept anything less than radical change.
Ms. Collins.
Yes, I want to echo that and just say thank you so much for having us onto this call. I'm so inspired by the work of all of the organizers and the fact that y'all took the initiative to step up and have this very difficult conversation in this time. So Dr. King said the famous quote. He said that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards freedom, and it bends
Hmm.
towards liberation, and it bends towards all these things that make the Black community what we've always been, resilient. And
Hmm.
so, Black folks are creative, resilient, hardworking, all of that, even in the midst of all that is going on. So, what I say to everybody is, we have to run the people in our community who are going to vote on our agenda, and it's gonna be a vote for one of us. And so my direction has been, in being from the Austin community, we often and traditionally have been left out and hyper segregated from the resources here on the west side of Chicago, is tapping into the young people and galvanizing around them, educating them on the importance of getting registered to vote, and not just voting for president, but voting for local school
Hmm.
council members, voting for judges,
Hmm.
which is the biggest problem in Cook County that we found out when we started unveiling the systemic problems of Laquan McDonald. Voting for your alderman and your committee person. All of
Hmm.
these people make a decision in how your community moves forth. And so we keep in this good fight. We remain as joyful warriors, even though I wish that we didn't have to continue to have this fight. But it doesn't stop here. This is just the beginning. We have to continue to do the work, both on the front lines of protest and in the policy rooms, and I intend on doing that.
Mr. Callaway?
Yeah, for sure. I want to say thank you to everybody for joining us. Well, this was definitely inspirational to listen to the thoughts of everybody. And I definitely want to echo Keena's sentiments earlier. It was because of the death of a Black woman, Rakia Boyd, that got me active in 2012. She was killed on the west side by former Chicago police detective Dante Servin, who was acquitted, was charged by Anita Alvarez and acquitted. So it is because of the life and death of Black women that we definitely need to be more proactive and make sure that their names are lifted up. I also want to point out, like, a lot of people been asking me why people looting. People need to understand, especially white America, right? The things that we're seeing, what's going on in the community, this is the manifestation of years of oppression, years of not receiving justice. It's just a formula and of so many things that's been going on with our community that we haven't had an antidote for. And that's why you're seeing this. But make no mistake about it, just how the Boston Tea Party was the first protesters, the people that came on this continent, they was the first looters. It was people already here and they looted them out. So people need to understand that America has perpetrated violence for way before Black people. We learned violence because of white America. So that's something that needs to be completely taught and understood. But I look forward to working with everybody. I want to make sure that people understand that we do have demands. We're not just protesting aimlessly, right? We want a new FOP contract. We want to make sure that the consent decree is being enforced properly. We want more trauma centers all across the city for those who are suffering from PTSD. Or we want federal charges on Jason Van Dyke, who is eligible for parole in 18 months, which is not justice for Laquan McDonald. And we want a comprehensive redevelopment plan for blighted neighborhoods all across the city of Chicago, from Austin to South Shore, from Bronzeville to Roseland. And those are our demands. And I don't think that anybody should stop protesting until our demands are met.
Well, I'll tell you, Cheryl, but you're going to wrap this up, but I would like to first say a thank you to Aslan, Keena, William, and Jamal. You give me hope as the oldest member of this group that the torch has been passed to 4 young Americans, in my eye, who are smarter than me, who have a whole lot more drive and determination, who have now been able to step up 2 or 3 steps in this fight for humanity. Because that's, at the end of the day, that's what this is. This is a fight for humanity. To my people, the most important thing out here, from my dad who passed away when he was 88, had an 8th grade education, was a janitor in a supermarket all his life, supported his 8 children and his wife, going to work every day, wearing a shirt and a tie just like this. And that's why I do this. That's why I appear on TV like this. One of the most important things he said to me was, you have to get the information. And for so long, we have been denied getting the information. Well, now we can get the information. There are places where we can get the information. And I am so proud of the protesters and the demonstrators who have protested and demonstrated peacefully. To the people out there who are looting, stop it. Stop it now. It is a crime to do so. Yes, we have been through a whole lot of hell in 400 years, but taking somebody else's property who perhaps had nothing to do with this is absolutely not the way to go. The way to go is in November at that ballot box, when you express your right that so many people fought for to give you, to go and vote in or out the people that will represent us. It's about the information. Do you hear me?
Wow. JR, that really sums it up. And it's so heartfelt, it's passionate, it's authentic. And if you aren't heard, your life isn't validated. And the reason why we're here right now is because George Floyd is not here.
That's right.
That is what sparked this conversation. It's candid, it's been truthful, it's been educational. My parents always told their 5 children, I'd rather raise a strong child than repair a broken adult. And so I have lived my life on goodness, grace, mercy, tried to be a warrior over a warrior. And in these times of uncertainty that we are facing, we have to continue to keep our faith, be educated, get the information, and be surrounded by exceptional people who have joined us on this panel today. And I'd like to close with this passage from W.E.B. Du Bois. What this world would be when human possibilities are free, when we discover each other, when the stranger is no longer the criminal and the certain inferior. With that, we say thank you to everybody who's joined us for this program. It's been extraordinary, it's been moving, it's been powerful. Rest in peace, George Floyd. And we together will rise together peacefully. We're in this together. And thank you to ABC7 Chicago for having this platform to share, to gather, to have brotherhood and sisterhood. We are our sisters and brothers keepers. We'll see you later today, everybody. Be blessed, and thank you again.